Hey everyone, this is Jeffrey with RealWorldEmber.com. So today's episode is going to be a little bit different. We're on a break between seasons 1 and 2, but we're going to play a little interlude. So I did a Ember roundtable with Eric with ProgramWithEric.com and David Tang at the JS Guy, and we talked about a lot of Ember-related topics. So I'm going to play that in a second. And go ahead and give me feedback on whether you want to see more stuff like this in the future, as well as what specific topics you might want to hear us talk about. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you at the end.
Hey guys, this is Eric. I'm with ProgramWithEric.com, and we're going to do something different today. We're going to try a roundtable discussion. So I'm going to let my guests here in the panel introduce themselves. So David, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your website?
Yeah, sure. So my name is David Tang. I blog at thejsguy.com, mostly about Ember, but other things like testing and in my past ramblings on other technologies. And then I currently work as a front-end developer at Verizon.
Nice. And Jeff, of course, Jeff, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I run emberscreencast.com. And as well as some other things like Real World Ember and some other upcoming attractions.
That's awesome. Yeah, the Real World Ember, the podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, just interviewing regular folks that you might not otherwise have heard of.
Cool. Very cool. So we've come up with some topics that I think could be interesting. We're going to talk a little bit about development, programming, mostly about Ember, because this is our Ember Roundtable. This is kind of an experiment to see how it goes. So we've talked, let's go ahead and start off with, EmberConf's coming up soon. I know, Jeff, you had been there once before.
Yeah, it was actually my first conference.
Can you just give us how was that?
So it was really great. And so you go in and there's all these people that you've seen online. And they're just all hanging out, chatting, and it's a huge concentration of some of the smartest people in the Ember community, as well as the general JavaScript community. And just being in that atmosphere is really great. Like, they have talks, and those are fine. You can watch those on Confreaks later. I did part of the hallway track last time. It's technically single track. I would just stay in the hallway and chat 5 minutes into each one. But I plan on doing even more of that this year.
What is that? I've been to other conferences, and a lot of times in between the talks is the most important part. Not the most important, but very interesting. So the conference talk, what did you mean by that?
Oh, so yeah, the most important part in general, the talks are very important, but you can get the talks later. You can watch them at home when you're alone. But being at the conference, that's the only time when you can talk to so many different people in the community and sort of get a feel for where the community is, get to know a lot of really cool people.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely think that's true. I've had a lot of interesting encounters with people in the community. At different conferences. I fortunately can't make it this year. I have another prior obligation, but hopefully I can make it next year. I don't know, David, I know you can't make it, but is that your experience too with conferences?
Well, actually, I am going this year, so.
Oh, you didn't make it last year, that is.
Yeah.
So you are making it this year. So.
Yeah, I think last year, maybe the year before, I was actually at the Angular conference. Now,
what?
Years.
Traitor.
Well, I've traded to Ember.
But he's our traitor.
But yeah, I'm super excited to go, and yeah.
How long was the Angular conference?
I think that one was 2 days, maybe 3 days. I think it was the first Angular conference, so there might have actually been two years ago, but it was their very first one, and yeah, it was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
but I don't think
was that when it was smaller and not the juggernaut it is now?
It was definitely, well, it was the first one, so tickets still sold out like in minutes and or
Uh-huh.
probably seconds, and it was still really big just because it was like the first one and everyone was talking about it. And I luckily got my employer to pay for it, so I didn't have to
Uh-huh.
worry about it. But yeah, it was cool.
So it's like a Justin Bieber show. Like you got to be right on the site.
Pretty much.
That's very cool. Yeah, well, so that's definitely something we're all going to be looking forward to, at least for you two guys. And I would say if anybody's listening to this, feel free to reach out to any of us, and at least to David or Jeff who'll be at the conference, and maybe we can have a meetup. If,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm speaking on your guys' behalf.
if for some reason I'm listening to a talk instead of talking to people, just like pull me out of there.
That's very cool. So we came up with some other questions, some topics to talk about. So I'll start with the first one. Why is Ember a good first framework? So I think definitely for beginners, I would say first you'd want to make sure that you know the basics HTML, CSS, and JavaScript before you jump into any sort of framework.
I don't know.
What do you think, Jeff?
So I typically jump in with the framework first. I didn't necessarily do that with Ember because I knew JavaScript before Ember was a thing, but I jumped into Rails before I knew Ruby really well. And I was able to learn all the HTML, CSS, and Ruby that I needed while within the framework. And when you're working within a framework, there are a lot of sharp edges that you don't necessarily run into that you would if you were using just vanilla language. And it's a lot more, that happens a lot more in JavaScript than in Ruby because Ruby is a very nice, beautiful, slow language. But JavaScript, it has all these sharp edges because it was made in a week and we can't break anything ever. And so, like, do you really need to know what .bind is in order to start working? If you're doing vanilla JS, definitely. If you're doing Ember, not really, because it handles all that scoping for you.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. I would think if you're a beginner and you're just starting off with Ember, I'd see that you can run everything pretty quickly. You can get a project up and running. You can start using the generators to start creating the scaffolding. I'm just worried that if you don't have that JavaScript basics, that you're going to run into some problems pretty quickly. You're going to not know how to, I don't know, bring up. You won't be able to insert specific information to the DOM at certain times or have certain things that you want to see.
Mm-hmm. And
I do.
That was
Go ahead.
especially true back when you had to use jQuery for some of that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I think Ember's getting the sort of abstractions now where you don't ever have to input anything directly into the DOM. I could be wrong about that.
I see. Yeah, I'm trying to think of scenarios where you might need to know a little bit more JavaScript, but
yeah,
I mean, it would be nice to have a good solid foundation. I did similarly to what you did, Jeff, when I started learning Ember. I was not anywhere near a JavaScript expert. I'm not a JavaScript expert now, but I certainly learned a lot in the last few years.
Mm-hmm.
And I did run into a few instances where not knowing it did hurt me, but I can see both sides.
Right.
I know definitely that tooling in Ember, Ember CLI tool itself is just pretty excellent for beginners. You can get up and running really quickly. And you get to really understand right away with the ES6 modules how to start doing things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what do you think, David?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also a great reason to get into Ember as a first framework because if you choose something else, you're pretty inundated with things like choosing which build package and gulp or grunt, and then how do I add this ES6 thing I keep hearing about, and how do I structure the project? And there's a lot of like small decisions that could take a week to figure out, and that's like a little bit too much for the beginner. Like they want to solve problems, build something. Like at least with Ember, it's like okay, you can get it running in about 5 minutes.
Yeah, and even after you're an Ember expert, trying to go back and build all those things from scratch, Like, I was writing a book where it was originally just going to be about ES 2015. So I was going to go get Babel and Broccoli running. And after a couple hours, I was just like, forget this. I'm using Ember CLI. They can install NPM.
Very true. I don't think I've actually tried using ES6 outside of an Ember project. I've never had to install like Babel or any of that.
Yeah, it's not super easy. I'm
Yeah.
sure there's a grunts package somewhere.
Yeah. Then you got to install Grunt. Yeah.
Right. And then you have to angst over whether you should have chosen gulp or broccoli.
That too.
Like, the angst is very important.
Yeah, and definitely like learning. You kind of, if you start off with Ember, your first framework, and this can be true with many others, but you're going to be learning the MVC architecture. You're going to be separating your code out between your templates, your components, your controllers,
Hmm.
and so and if you use Ember data, you're going to have your different types of models. So I think that's a good primer to write good clean code to start off with. It's really that's the way you want to write it in Ember.
Yeah, and it
Yeah.
also does I guess it introduces you to the idea of testing because like I think, a lot of JavaScript developers they probably have never even heard of testing. I know I didn't when, at least within my first few years, and at least if you start off with Ember and you run some of these Ember generate commands, you see that test file and you're like, what is that? Maybe, at least you get
Hmm.
exposed to it a little early on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I had this irrational fear of JavaScript testing, but once I actually start, Ember makes it really easy. Like,
Yeah,
there are still big hiccups in places, but it's amazing how much stuff has been smoothed over by the Ember tooling.
yeah, definitely.
I mean, one other thing definitely would be maybe there's a little bit of a con for beginners is that if you don't understand what it's doing, what Ember CLI is doing, you'll be ignoring certain parts of it, and then to extend it, it'll be a little bit harder. So let's say you wanted to add some development dependencies to your project,
Hmm.
and you use Bower. Maybe you don't understand. Well, now I got to go into this Ember CLI build and then import it in here. And if it's like AMD or non-AMD, I guess some beginners might be confused about that
Right.
and and not understand what exactly to do.
Because they try to bring in the React style, take a little bit of everything approach. And that will really not work with Ember CLI. Like, you can swap stuff out, but you have to do it through the system.
And I don't know if you guys agree with this, but the content secure policy CSP
Oh yeah.
that runs that always give
Yeah,
you a bunch of errors.
they're
I
taking that
do not
out.
like that. They are
Yeah, newer versions of
okay
Ember
because
CLI are not going to have that.
Oh wow.
I was
Thank
gonna say
goodness.
okay, thank you, because I always just delete it out of my node modules, and I never like that. And when you open up the console, you see if you don't set it up correctly, you always see a bunch of errors. So
Yeah. So we've all been super positive about Ember for beginners, but I want to say something negative real quick.
yeah, that's why I was saying we should do the pros and cons for people. I
Yeah.
think that's okay.
One of the cons is okay, so the community is great, and the community is awesome, especially for people that have already been in it, and it's pretty welcoming to newcomers. But there's one thing we do which is awesome for people who are already here, which is we discuss to death things that are not created yet. And I feel like the bulk of our hype cycle is on stuff that isn't here yet. And so you come into Ember, you hear about, ooh, routable components, those sound good. And then you start creating them and like, oh man, I know I'm not supposed to use controllers. How do I get these routable components? But it turns out they're not a thing yet. They're somewhere in Canary behind a feature flag. And there's a constant thing where at any point where you join, there's going to be something like that.
Yeah, I agree totally with the controllers versus components, the routable component thing. It's something we've been hearing about for a while. It's going to land sooner or later.
Uh-huh.
But as a beginner who's starting with Ember, they're like, okay, I have these controllers and I have these components, and then I have I have actions, I have closure actions. But if I use closure actions, I still really need to use controllers.
Mm-hmm.
And what about? I mean, there's this whole idea of bubbling. I think that could be confusing for beginners, and how you want to do certain actions or certain things in certain parts of the application. So we might want to have stuff happening in the router, but not inside the controller or
Right.
component.
And that
So
man,
that kind of goes a little beyond
I'm gonna
that. But
do the thing that I complained about. I think that's being solved with routable components.
Yeah, I could totally. Yeah, that's pretty frustrating. I mean, I was recently trying to get work at work. We're actually converting over to Ember from Angular, and there's those questions come up a lot where it's like, what about controllers and routable components? Like, should I be using controllers and all that? And
Mhm.
I can see that it's definitely tough as a beginner because it's you see a lot of this stuff and it will be deprecated, but it's not yet. So should I use it?
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a lot
yeah,
of forward thinking, which is usually good, unless it's looking farther than we are.
Yeah.
I know there's the 6 week release cycle. I know they've changed it to have a more longer term support cycles. I mean, Jeff, do you know how? I mean, can you explain that a little bit better? I don't know
Yeah,
as well.
so how I'm understanding that is you've got your 6 weeks release cycle where they are not going to break any public APIs, but they can still change private APIs. And they might do a deprecation for common private APIs one release cycle ahead of time. So, say if they want to remove something in 2.5, that's a commonly used private API. Then in 2.4, they might give a deprecation warning on it. So, that's the current thing. The new thing with long term support is they're promising that if you are on 2.4 and you get rid of all your deprecation warnings, then you can go to 2.8 just fine without having to worry about a private API being knocked out somewhere there. And that's going to make it a lot easier on add-on authors and on people who write versioned instructional material. Because I know like there are some books that were updated every 6 weeks, and that's just really intense. Now they only have to be updated twice a year.
Yeah, exactly. I know the production. Yeah, I guess if you're constantly upgrading stuff in production, that is valuable to have the new cycles of releasing. But going back to the why is the Ember a good first framework? I mean, I guess that is a pro and a con that we have such frequent updates to the framework, but
Right.
it can cause issues for people that are having apps in production. They need to constantly upgrade them.
Yeah, staying up.
Yeah. I
Did you
feel
guys?
that. Go
Oh, go
ahead.
ahead. I was gonna go back to like, some of the tougher parts for beginners in Ember. Did you guys have a hard time learning things like Ember data?
Yeah, I learned it before the big rewrite. And
Okay.
so before the big rewrite, it was kind of a mess. And I'm talking about not the most recent big rewrite, the one that from to 1.13 and 2.0, but the one a year to year and a half before that. I
Yeah.
think they called it J.J. Abrams because it was a reboot. And before that, it was very difficult to work with because they were trying to do. I mean, Ember Data in its current form is really ambitious, but it was even more ambitious than that before. And it was just too much. And so they simplified it. They took it down to what they knew they could handle. And after that, it got much easier to learn. I don't know. I guess you learned it after the big rewrite. So what was your experience?
I tried it like actually, well, I actually tried Ember right when 1.0 came out, and I think I was watching the Code School course, the warming
Uh
up
huh.
with Ember. And so the course was great, and I tried taking it to like a real project with, a different API, and I was like, why isn't this working? And I just it was really frustrating. So that's kind of actually why I stopped looking at Ember between like 1.0 and then 1.6.
Uh huh.
And then I kind of got back into it and spent a little bit more time closer to 2.0 at least with Ember Data, and it took a little time, but I think I've fully grasped it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's difficult because it's tackling a large problem domain.
Yeah, and I think that's actually really difficult for beginners because like you first get into it and everyone's talking about Ember data. You see all these tutorials using Ember data, but your API might not actually be formatted that same way. And so you quickly get into like, okay, I got to customize this adapter and this serializer and this and this. So it can be I can see why the learning curve is a little bit tough for beginners unless your backend is like already perfectly structured.
Right. Yeah, so I guess I've been working with mostly Rails apps, so that makes it real easy.
Yeah, I'd say that wasn't me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had that issue too. If you have control of the back end, you can create the API, then you're golden. But if you're using some other buddy's API or you're not control of it, then you're gonna have to be looking at rewrite, extending the serializer or adapters and trying to create either find an adapter that works or use the Ember data and then try to write your own serializer, and it's not easy. That's definitely a little bit more difficult for beginners to do that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
But I think overall, for someone just starting out, if you're looking for a good JavaScript framework, I think Ember is definitely a good choice.
Yeah.
To get started.
Agree.
Yeah, what are the good tutorials right now? I know Code School just released an updated one.
Yeah, I just got an email from the guy that wrote it, and he asked me to update some of my tutorials because I have a couple of blog posts that I mentioned Code School in. Because I did try the Code School at the beginning, and I liked it. That was before Ember CLI, but yeah, the new one is using Ember CLI, and it's supposed to be better.
Yeah, I actually tried it recently. I was just curious just to see how it was updated, and it's pretty good. I think it's a great start for beginners, and because it introduces you both to CLI and most of the concepts. It doesn't use Ember data. It just uses like services for the data store or for data access, but it's still like a great introduction.
Yeah. I mean, I think all three of our websites could be great resources. I mean, we don't have to go plug again, but Ember Screencast, Program with Eric, the JS guy. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, if beyond ours, I know that for a while Ember Watch was a pretty good resource. I think we all know that. I think they're going to be starting to rewrite that.
Oh, good.
I'm trying to update that soon. So that'll be great.
Yeah, I know our three sites are more for intermediate developers, it seems like. So it's not great for just starting. And Emberwatch has a similar thing.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. And then, like Ember guides, obviously, would be the best place.
And the guides are actually really good now.
Yeah, they've really gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
There's also, I know, some other paid resources that I thought were pretty good, like the Rock and Roll with Ember book.
Yeah, that one's good.
Yeah, I read that and I really liked it.
And also Ember 101, which used to be Ember CLI 101. That's now free.
Yeah, so that's great if you don't want to, commit just yet to a paid resource.
Right. That's usually the first place that I point people.
Yeah.
And I'll have to give a plug for my book, the Ember JS Cookbook. It's coming out next month, hopefully. So, and it goes through a lot of very beginner stuff all the way to intermediate, and maybe a little bit advanced, but mostly beginner to intermediate. And we go over a bunch of different recipes and all the different basics that you would see in the guides. I create my own recipes for a lot of those different concepts and ideas to get people through.
Okay. Is it like you start off building an application and by the end you have kind of a complete application?
Well, each chapter is a different topic, and in each topic there's something called recipes, but they're really just either short snippets of code or short applications which illustrate a certain concept. So you might have a chapter on components, and then we go into, okay, this is how a component's set up, this is how you pass stuff into a component, this is how you add it to the template, and then a few things along the way there.
Oh, super cool. Excited to see.
And then, yeah, thanks. And then at the end of the book, it gets into more advanced, larger programs.
Nice. So
like that.
Are parts of the book understandable for beginners?
Yeah, it's a really tricky to do that because you have to assume a certain level of sophistication with the end user of the book. Right. Otherwise, you'll be just sitting there writing, really basic beginner stuff. So there is a lot of things that there is a certain level of what you should know before you start the book. So
Mm-hmm.
obviously a little bit of HTML, CSS, JavaScript, but after that, I really go into detail of just a lot of the basics at the beginning of the book, and then it ramps up from there.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess while we're talking about our own stuff, I am writing a book that introduces people to the new type of JavaScript as well as some concepts in Ember CLI and Ember. It's because it's all taking place within an Ember component, and we're just building Pac-Man.
That's pretty
Very
cool.
Yeah.
Do you have a URL for that, Jeff?
I'll set up a lean pub before we post this show so we can put in the show notes.
Cool. Definitely.
Is it targeted towards just people completely new to Ember, or is it like a specific
Yeah, it's people who are completely new to Ember. You don't necessarily have to have any JavaScript experience because the first few chapters are explaining JavaScript concepts in pretty painstaking detail. So my target is smart people who have experience in at least one language and might not have used JavaScript that much.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's great.
Yeah. But I mean, if you're past that and you just want to learn how to build Pac-Man, you can just skim over some of the sections.
Very cool.
Very cool. Yeah. Yeah. So that's some good resources. I know. I think I had a blog post. I'll add it to the show notes too. I went over some more resources. So yeah, there's definitely a lot out there. So well, let's move on to another question. So if you are beginning to start Ember, where should you go, or not what resources, but what should you do if you're starting with Ember? Um, I was thinking like obviously if you're trying to learn the language or learn the framework that is, you should probably start creating projects and then posting those projects online, submitting it to GitHub, maybe even blogging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think trying to maybe do what you've done in previous apps, like if you're coming from like maybe you were just doing some plain jQuery and you made some Ajax calls and displayed it on a page, like maybe try and replicate that within Ember. I think that's a pretty good first project.
Right. I mean, I think the first project is best done within the context of a book or a program because that's going to show you the Ember way of doing it. And then what I would do either if your project that you want to do is similar, you can just start editing the end result of that project. Or you can copy some of it and bring it over to the one you want to create.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because
So
there's nothing like having a bunch of working code that you can just mess with.
hmm Yeah, you can see a lot
I
of the patterns in place and how things were already done. Learn from that.
Yeah. And then you don't have a blank slate staring at you, this blank canvas.
I know when I started learning Ember, I did go through the code school course to try to build a simple application. I don't remember what it was. I think it's like a storefront, I
Uh-huh.
think. And then I was reading a couple of books that helped me out. And then just recently, I was actually learning different, just kind of dipping my toe into React. And I tried to create an application there, and I did exactly what you did, Jeff. I started using the course I was taking. I was using that
Mm-hmm.
their framework, their application as kind of my first app. So
Yeah.
let's say we're going on to the second app. You're still trying to learn Ember. You've read some books. You may have done the sample apps in some of the books, but your second or third application just to get an idea of the framework. I mean, a lot of people start doing like to-do apps, or I've done this in the past in some of my blog articles, is how to create a blog type
Uh-huh.
applications. What do you guys think about those type of applications to learn a language or framework?
Yeah, I think that's a great way. Just find something you're passionate about, maybe start building it. I know in the past, like I've usually done something where it's like I'll find some open API, like GitHub's API, and then like grab some data, put it on a page, throw some styling, and that's like, and I'll slowly add in some more Ember-y concepts in there. It's kind of one way I've done it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it all depends on what sort of complexity you're willing to tackle. And to-do apps and blogs are popular because they've been proven to have the right kind of amount of complexity for a first or second app. But if you're really excited about something that's more complex, just start with a simple version of it and know that you're going to have a little bit of a harder time.
Yeah, going back to what you were saying, David, I remember playing around with the Reddit API and just trying to get the Reddit information in to create my own gallery. I think
Hmm.
I did that a little while back, and that was just kind of a fun little. It wasn't one of my first apps, but it was just one of my fun ways to work with the framework and get an idea of what it can do
Yeah, what
beyond.
I'd say one of like I've tried learning other things in the past, and one of the struggles I had was like if I try and do something a little bit too ambitious, I focus maybe a little bit more on the back end stuff, like trying to get the API so I can work with it in Ember. Whereas like
Uh-huh.
that's not the whole goal. Like I want to learn Ember, like use something that's already built, and just like if it's a public API, just use that, and then I don't have to mess with like trying to set up a Rails server or whatever. And it's like
Yeah.
you're focusing more on the thing you want to learn.
Yeah, that's smart.
I like Firebase. I think that's been a real great tool, so I can focus more on the front end and not have to worry about the back end versus things when I'm learning.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about Firebase. So how complex can your apps get while using it?
I mean, yeah, definitely can. I mean, it's essentially for people who don't know, Firebase can be a way you can do authentication. You can also be your data store, so it can be your database,
Hmm.
and it's just talks over the public internet over an API back to it. So you can put in a bunch of security in there, so only your website can talk back to it. You can. It's a little bit more complicated to do the security, but you can put in only certain parts of the application to be displayed for authenticated users.
Right.
So it is powerful in that way. I mean, it's definitely if you want total and complete control, you still need to go with with your own backend, Rails or Node or
Right.
something like that. But if you're for a lot of applications, and if you get sophisticated enough, I'm sure you can almost duplicate a lot of stuff you're doing with Node or Rails inside Firebase.
Right.
There,
Cool. Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
I would say I've heard a lot of good things.
Yeah, I've tried it just for like the basic stuff, and their adapter is incredibly easy to use. Like if you want to start learning Ember data without having to muck with setting up your own backend or some of the complexities of adapters and serializers, you can really just install it and just start working with Ember data just like in the tutorials and have a full app working. So yeah, it's definitely I think a good resource if you're starting out.
Nice. And another good starter is Ember CLI Mirage. They've got it set up so you can run your tests and your dev environment, or even your production environment if you really want to go there, if you don't need people editing things from the same set of fixtures and factories. And so you just set up, it's sort of like a Firebase that you have on your server, like on your dev environment.
Yeah, Mirage is awesome. Yeah, we use it too. It's such a useful tool.
Yeah.
Yeah, to get up and running and then get everything taken care of. I know that there's also a built-in Express server that you can use using Ember CLI. I've kind of not used it too much,
Really?
but I've
Huh.
yeah,
I didn't know
you
that.
can yeah. If I'm wrong, I'll put it in the show notes, but I'm pretty sure there is
Huh.
that you can generate. But yeah, I think Ember CLI Mirage is definitely more fully featured and you can do a lot more with it.
Yeah. If I guess that stole the oxygen from the thing you're talking about.
Well, I still think the CLI Mirage is the best, but I've written a lot about it, and it's definitely good to get started when you're learning Ember.
Yeah, definitely.
So, as Ember developers, here's another question and topic we can discuss. What are some things have we learned that made us better developers in general just by learning Ember?
I think
Ooh.
that testing that I did testing I think in Angular and Backbone and stuff, but it opened my eyes up to the other types of testing, especially like acceptance testing, because I tried it in Angular and Backbone with like things like Casper or Protractor, and they just I usually gave up because they're a little bit hard to work with and they kind of didn't run consistently. Whereas now I can, with Ember, I really saw the value in just their acceptance testing, and it was just how easy it was and how fast it was. It made me start actually writing a lot more. So that kind of opened my eyes up to that.
Yeah, I've never been great at doing tests. Something I always know I should do, but I don't always do.
Hmm.
But yeah, definitely tests. I would say is a great example. I mean, of structuring maybe you guys have been better at structuring your applications into unique little files, but definitely using the MVC structure and having everything in its own place. I guess in general, has made me think a little bit differently when I
Yeah.
create projects.
Yeah, and it's really turned me on to the idea of internal APIs, where we think a lot about the user interface of our app. Other people more than me, honestly. But we don't often think as much about the user interface of the libraries that we're creating, and even within our own app. And so Ember has a lot of defaults that help you make better internal APIs. Like components are a great example because you have to specify what state you're passing in. And then that helps you think better about what do I need instead of just assuming everything, instead of just passing in all of the controller state. And once that idea turns on in your head, you can start to think, oh, where else can I use this? How can I make everything this nice?
Hmm.
Yeah, I like that. I like that way of thinking. Trying to do that.
Yeah, their API is very developer friendly and intuitive. So it's like even if you don't know something, you can kind of guess what it is a lot of times, or you know what to Google, and
Yeah.
it's that easy to think about.
Oh, we need to make it harder so that we get a better graph on Google searches.
Yeah.
We got to win the mind share by having shitty APIs.
Well, there is. Are you talking about like the Google Trends,
Yeah.
or that's I'll. This is a little bit of a tangent. Sorry about that. I might have a couple crazy things downstairs, but I was gonna say, going back to the trends, and this might be a little bit of a tangent, but if you look at Google Trends and you look at Angular and Ember and React, you're definitely seeing Ember is not quite as high on that graph as others. But I don't think that's the end all be all of Ember and how its popularity is growing or not growing. I
Right.
don't know if you
And
guys seen that.
there are definitely things we've done to shoot ourselves in the foot with regard to that metric, like starting a Slack channel where most of the talking happens. And so we encourage people, instead of posting on Stack Overflow, you ask someone in the Slack channel, which is terrible for our rankings. And then by making great, easily searchable guides, so you don't search for it first on Google. You first go to the guides. Once again, terrible for our rankings.
I never
So I
thought.
propose that we make it hard to ask questions to people, and then we start introducing errors into the guides that people are going to have to Google.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's how we can recapture developer mindshare, at least in
There's
terms of
an
this
old.
metric.
Exactly. I mean, you're half joking, but yeah, it's. I wish there was. I wish on things like Google Trends and where people come to take a look at the popularity of frameworks that Ember was a little bit higher on that list. There's an old article. I think it was ranking pretty high in Google about I think it was like compare the frameworks or Ember versus React versus whatever X, and it's been written a couple years ago, and I don't like that article that much, but it always shows up when people start comparing frameworks.
Uh-huh.
And of course, one of the things they put on there is Google Trends and how the Ember JS search terms are not as popular as the Angular or React search terms.
Right. And I mean, there is a side benefit of the crowd followers get filtered out, so we have a generally better community. But I mean, to have a super robust community, we do need a few crowd followers,
Yeah,
because
I
that's
mean that
a lot
also
of people.
exactly, and then you also have the companies that want to start using Ember, and then they start Googling it and they try to compare the different frameworks, and then these articles come up that show, well, Ember isn't as popular as these other two, and their search terms are down, and then
Right.
it makes them rethink of using the framework in their projects. When in actuality, the framework is as good, if not better, than its competitors, and the community is great, and you're going to get all the help you need.
Right. And I mean, C++ is one of the most popular languages, and no one's using it for a web server.
Yeah.
I know my
Popularity is not necessarily what you want to go for.
I know it's. I think at least in the code school course, they started mentioning like some pretty big companies that are using Ember. I think they
Hmm.
mentioned like PlayStation and like a bunch of
Yeah,
Apple stuff. So it seems like with Ember 2, it's gotten a lot more popular and people are um, the community's growing.
hmm,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think so. Yeah, I think with Ember 2, when Ember 2 came out last year and it was talked about at EmberConf, I definitely saw that everybody was talking a lot more about it. And then people were talking about Angular being the rewrite and how that was going to be a problem. So I think it's definitely gained a little bit of popularity.
yeah. But the places it's gained popularity it hasn't been with the Hacker News crowd. Because for them, Angular's dead, Ember's dead, React is almost dead, but Elm isn't quite good enough to take its place yet.
Do you guys think
But
the Angular 2 thing will kind of like reshift it a little?
maybe. I mean, that's probably not new enough for them. But
Well, yeah,
the where it's growing in popularity is it looks like within big companies that have already been burned by using a less comprehensive framework.
Hmm.
yeah, exactly. I mean, don't get me started with the Hacker News crowd. I have a love-hate relationship with them. As a content creator that tries to get some of my things on there and then just going in and listening and reading the forum topics and Hacker News.
Uh-huh.
And, I admit I like to bitch and complain about things every now and then, but if you want to hear a bunch of complainers, then go on Hacker News and jump in one of those threads
Well,
and the negativity that's spewed out
I
there
think the
is pretty
problem
high.
is you're not Elon Musk. So what are you doing on Hacker News?
Now, I will give I that's not for everybody. There's definitely some topics that are really positive and really happy, but I've seen a lot of things being torn down more than brought up, and at least in the comment section of Hacker News.
Right. It's a very they don't have the politeness filter necessarily, which is both good and bad. The bad things are
Yeah,
more obvious.
yeah. Uh, well, moving on there. I don't. I think that's all the topics that I came up with here. Do you guys have some other ones that we could talk about?
So, full disclosure to people listening, my table I'm on right now is not round. It's a rectangle. I just had to be honest here.
Well, yeah, that's important.
All right.
Hey, David, I have one question for you. You said your Verizon has been using Ember. I know you probably can't talk about your employer too much, but did they go through a bunch of different frameworks before they landed on Ember, or was there a different process when they went there?
Yeah, everything was actually built using Angular and Gulp and some other JavaScript libraries, and then I worked on those too a little bit, and then I introduced Ember just because I had a lot of great experiences with it, and the problems that we were facing there were pretty much solved by Ember. Things like testing and convention over configuration, and just
Hmm.
things just out of the box because of Ember CLI. And so we've slowly migrated some of our stuff over to that, and we're still kind of in that process, kind of moving it over from one place to another, or moving it over from Angular to Ember. But yeah, it's a good transition, and I think it's the right move just because it'll make it easy for developers to hop on, between different projects and without
Yeah.
having to ramp up on all the special conventions that were created with that one kind of glue your own framework.
Yeah. I know about a company that did something similar. They weren't even using Angular though. They were using Backbone.
Yeah,
So all their projects were very special.
yeah, that's even harder.
Like, and I don't mean special as in badly engineered, because they are fine in terms of engineering, but they were all different. And so
Hmm.
jumping between them was next to impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of time spent in thinking about those conventions, like even file naming and project structure, and it just takes time away from like the real thing that's important.
Right. Yeah, I'd rather have Robert Jackson spend a year and a half thinking about file structure and then tell me the right answer
Exactly.
rather than me spend 2 weeks thinking about it and getting it probably wrong.
Yep.
My question is, how's that guy have enough time to do everything he does? That guy's everywhere.
She
He's
contributes
so
to everything on Ember.
Yeah, I think Does he do just Ember work as like paying job, or does he do client work as well?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think he's. I saw a presentation with him. I think he was in New York City and he did a presentation a while back, and I thought he. I don't remember where he works now. I
Uh-huh.
don't know.
Like if you
But yeah,
hire
he's
him, is
certainly
it
everywhere.
just a status boost for your company, or does he actually work on your code base as well? Because if it's just a status boost, then it kind of makes sense how he can get so much done. But if he's
Yeah.
also working on company code, that's even more insane.
Yeah, there's a handful of like developers in this world that are just amazing about how much output that they can make, especially in the open source community.
Hmm.
I think there's a few people that come to mind, but that goes a little bit beyond what we're talking about now. Okay, well that's all we have now. I think this is an interesting. We hit up a couple of few interesting topics here. Any closing thoughts from anybody here, Jeff?
So this has been awesome, and I have no more thoughts. I am completely thoughted out.
You want to give another plug for where people can reach you at?
Yeah, so you can reach me. You can go to my site, emberscreencast.com. You can reach me on Twitter at Jeffrey Biles or at emberscreencast. And if you want to check out the book that I'm writing, I don't have a URL yet, but you can go and find it in the show notes.
Sweet, for sure. What's up, David?
Let's see. You can find my Ember adventures, mostly Ember, but other JavaScript stuff too. TheJSGuy.com. Mostly lately, it's about Ember data, just because been doing a lot of custom API stuff. But it's pretty much everything Ember these days. And then on Twitter, it's SkaterDave85 without the E in Dave.
Is that just some Twitter handle you had forever?
Yeah, and I just never changed it. And now I have too many. I have enough of a following where I don't want to change it, so I just stuck with it.
I have a few like that too. All right, cool. Yeah, and then I'm Eric with programwitheric.com. You can reach me at EricCH, and that's with a K.
All right.
All
Well, it's
right,
great
thanks,
talking to you
guys.
guys.
Yeah, it's fun.
All right. See you next
All
time.
right.
Okay, see you guys.
So that was our first roundtable. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know if you want to hear other content like this on this feed, as well as let me know what sort of topics you'd like us to hear us discuss at future roundtables. I'll see you next time.
I know about a company that did something similar. They weren't even using Angular, though. They were using Backbone.
Yeah,
So all their projects were very special.
yeah, that's even harder.
Like, and I don't mean special as in badly engineered, because they are fine in terms of engineering, but they were all different. And so
Hmm.
jumping between them was next to impossible.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of time spent in thinking about those conventions, like even file naming and project structure, and it just takes time away from like the real thing that's important.
Right. Yeah, I'd rather have Robert Jackson spend a year and a half thinking about file structure and then tell me the right answer
Exactly.
rather than me spend 2 weeks thinking about it and getting it probably wrong.
Yep.
My question is, how's that guy have enough time to do everything he does? That guy's everywhere.
She contributes
Just
to
some,
everything on Ember.
Yeah. I think does he do just Ember work as like paying job, or does he do client work as well?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think he's. I saw a presentation with him. I think he was in New York City and he did a presentation a while back, and I thought he. I don't remember where he works now. I
Uh-huh.
don't know.
Like if you
But yeah,
hire
he's
him, is
certainly
it
everywhere.
just a status boost for your company, or does he actually work on your code base as well? Because if it's just a status boost, then it kind of makes sense how he can get so much done. But if he's
Yeah.
also working on company code, that's even more insane.
Yeah, there's a handful of like developers in this world that are just amazing about how much output that they can make, especially in the open source community.
Hmm.
I think there's a few people that come to mind, but that goes a little bit beyond what we're talking about now.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's all we have now. I think this is an interesting. We hit up a few interesting topics here. Any closing thoughts from anybody here, Jeff?
So this has been awesome, and I have no more thoughts. I am completely thoughted out.
You want to give another plug for where people can reach you at?
Yeah, so you can reach me. You can go to my site, emberscreencast.com. You can reach me on Twitter at @JeffreyBiles or at EmberScreencast. And if you want to check out the book that I'm writing, I don't have a URL yet, but you can go and find it in the show notes.
Sweet. For sure. What's up, David?
Let's see. You can find my Ember adventures, mostly Ember, but other JavaScript stuff too. thejsguy.com. Mostly lately, it's about Ember data, just because I've been doing a lot of custom API stuff. But it's pretty much everything Ember these days. And then on Twitter, it's SkaterDave85 without the E in Dave.
Is that just some Twitter handle you had forever?
Yeah, and I just never changed it. And now I have too many. I have enough of a following where I don't want to change it, so I just left it.
I have a few like that too. All right, cool. Yeah, and then I'm Eric with programwitheric.com. You can reach me at EricCH, and that's with a K.
All right.
All
well, it's
right.
great talking to you guys.
Yeah, it's fun.
All right, see you next time.
Right. Okay, see you guys.
So that was our first roundtable. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know if you want to hear other content like this on this feed, as well as let me know what sort of topics you'd like us to hear us discuss at future roundtables. I'll see you next time. So that was our first roundtable. I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know if you want to hear other content like this on this feed, as well as let me know what sort of topics you'd like us to hear us discuss at future roundtables. I'll see you next time.